Hello and welcome. I'm Saad Dino, pharmacist and co-owner of Acton Pharmacy, West Concord Pharmacy, and Keys Drug and Newton. I would like to welcome everyone back to our show, A Healthier You. Our goal is to discuss relevant health topics and to provide information that will guide you to a healthier lifestyle. Today, we will be discussing Alzheimer's disease with Nicole McGurn, the Director of Family Services for the Alzheimer's Association in Massachusetts and New Hampshire chapters for the past 10 years. Thank you for being here, Nicole. I'm so pleased that we're discussing this important topic and look forward to educating our viewers about Alzheimer's disease. Can you please tell us more about yourself and what you do at the Alzheimer's Association?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Saad.
My pleasure.
I've been working in the field of geriatrics for the past 20 years or so in a variety of different settings, from home care, nursing homes, and assisted living. And for the past 10 years, the focus of my work has been on helping families with Alzheimer's disease, either one-on-one or in education groups, support groups, and in a variety of different ways. At the Alzheimer's Association, my particular job, I oversee a team of talented professionals who provide information, advice, support, and education to families living with Alzheimer's.
Great. Again, thank you for being here. I look forward to our discussion. My first question to you would be, can you please tell us, our viewers, what Alzheimer's disease is and how it relates to dementia in general?
Okay. Well, I'm going to start by starting with dementia in general.
Fine.
Dementia is not really a disease in and of itself. It's a category of diseases. Just like we have all different types of, unfortunately, cancer, there's all different kinds of dementia too.
Okay.
And diseases that are considered dementia are ones that affect people's memory, can cause confusion or changes in behavior and thinking and planning and behavior. Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. It accounts for probably 60 to 80% of all cases of irreversible or non-treatable types of dementia.
Okay. How widespread is Alzheimer's disease?
Alzheimer's disease, unfortunately, is very common. It affects more than 5 million Americans today. It's estimated that every 67 seconds somebody new develops Alzheimer's. And those numbers are staggering.
Okay.
But if you think about a world years from now, like in year 2050, you're talking about probably about 14 million people with Alzheimer's disease if nothing is done to prevent or cure Alzheimer's disease.
You say every 67 seconds?
Every 67 seconds.
That's unbelievable.
Right now, Alzheimer's disease is actually the 6th leading cause of death in America.
Okay.
It's the only one on that list that doesn't have a treatment, a way of slowing it down, or a way to prevent it.
Okay. Wow, that's staggering. As we all know, anyone can be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. How do we distinguish the early signs of the disease from everyday forgetfulness, such as forgetting the car keys, for example, where they are, or other aspects of life that you forget about? But what's the first signs, I guess, of Alzheimer's disease?
Sure. So there is a lot of confusion between what's a part of normal aging and what's Alzheimer's disease.
Sure.
Everyone's memory starts to change as we age. It's estimated that starting at age 30, our ability to remember things like phone numbers and people's names and learn new information starts to get worse. So it starts early, not just, but with older people, it's even more confusing. So some of the early warning signs of Alzheimer's disease are short-term memory loss, so your ability to remember things that recently happened. But it also includes noticing changes in your ability to do familiar tasks, to plan activities, changes in speech, forgetting words, things like that, maybe even noticing a change in personality and behavior. What makes things concerning and not just a sign of normal aging or a once in a while kind of occurrence, I mean, we all have a bad day,
Sure.
Is that when it could be Alzheimer's disease, these symptoms interfere with your day-to-day life and seem to get worse over time. So it's not an incident of, getting a phone call from your kid and you just can't remember what you had for breakfast that day. But every other day that you get this question, you know the answer to that question. It's a matter of, never remembering what you had for breakfast a half an hour later, or forgetting, half of the time. It's having, having such severe memory problems that you're, not making it to any of your appointments on time. So it's serious.
Do you see that progressing over time, or could it happen like this all of a sudden? I mean, what's typically is seen with those type of symptoms that you're describing?
Sure. Typically with Alzheimer's disease, there's a slow, progressive onset.
Okay.
When we get calls on our helpline from people who said to me, "Oh, in the last week, my mother cannot remember who I was. She can't do anything she used to." Our first reaction is, please call your doctor right away. It's probably
Sure.
not Alzheimer's. It's probably something more serious. Not that Alzheimer's isn't serious, but it could be a serious acute medical condition.
Got it. Great recommendation. So, leading into that, how is Alzheimer's disease diagnosed?
It's not easy to diagnose Alzheimer's disease.
Can you go through the steps if you don't mind?
Sure.
Please.
Unfortunately, there's no single test to determine if somebody's dementia symptoms are Alzheimer's disease or if they're caused by some other disease, because there are other diseases that can cause the same symptoms. And there aren't a lot of tests for those types of diseases. So it's a matter of first of all, doing tests to rule out any cause that we do have a test for. So to make sure someone's not depressed, make sure someone doesn't have a vitamin deficiency, going through all those kinds of tests to rule out anything else causing the disturbing symptoms you see. And then the second part of that process is, if we've ruled out that nothing else is causing those problems, is to gather evidence to see what type of dementia someone has. So there's blood tests, there's imaging, doing a lot of interviewing of both the person who has the symptoms and their family members to see what exact symptoms people are having trouble with. And kind of looking at all that information and seeing, does this look like it fits Alzheimer's disease, or does it look like it fits dementia caused by a stroke or something like that instead? So that's the way they go about that. It usually does take a team of individuals. It's not usually one doctor who's doing this. It's usually a combination of a neurologist, a neuropsychologist, sometimes even a psychiatrist to look at the information. And you can imagine this can take a while, sometimes weeks, months, and can be costly as well, because you're not talking about one simple blood test. You're talking about a variety of different tests, and emotionally exhausting too for families. But if someone does go through a thorough workup with a skilled professional, even without that single test, their accuracy is about 90% correct.
That's pretty good accuracy.
It's pretty good accuracy, and I believe it's really worth it for families. First of all, to make sure that someone doesn't have a problem that's treatable, but also to allow people to get the help they need, to make plans, and to have access to the treatment that is available.
So to piggyback on the comments you just made, let's say I suspect one of my loved one, a grandmother, a mother, a dad, has Alzheimer's disease. That's a suspicion on my part. What would you recommend to be the best course of action? I know you just described it a little bit, but just for our viewers, if we could just go step by step, or in recommendations that the association has when there's a suspicion of Alzheimer's disease, what steps to take?
Sure. So when I talk to families about this problem, which is a common reason that people do call us to ask us what to do, I recommend starting with the primary care physician, who can usually do some simple tests to rule out simple causes to what could be those symptoms. Because again, symptoms like confusion, memory loss, a change in behavior, it could be Alzheimer's, but it could be something that's treatable as well. It could be caused by depression, a B12 vitamin deficiency, and your primary care physician can do some basic screening and make sure nothing like that is going on. And if he or she, rules out those things, they can make a referral to a neurologist or a memory clinic to have the more thorough evaluation that I spoke about. I think for a lot of families, unfortunately, what's the challenge is, how do I get my family member to the doctor to have that examination? And that can be really tricky. If you have a good relationship with a primary care physician, you might be able to talk with them before the appointment about what your concerns are, so that you don't have to say something upsetting to your mom or dad in front of them, and the doctor can just assess that himself or herself. But some families, it's more challenging than that to get someone to go to the doctor if they haven't seen someone for a long time. And in those cases, I highly recommend people call our 24/7 helpline. We talk with families all the time to kind of come up with some individual suggestions for how to get the person to the doctor.
Is there an age? Is there any age that people could be diagnosed with Alzheimer's, or could be young, older, middle? I mean, is there any specifics that you've seen in the studies that have come out recently?
Sure. So Alzheimer's disease affects older people the most. Your chances of developing Alzheimer's disease if you're over 65 is 1 in 9 people over 65 have Alzheimer's disease. Okay. If someone's 85, your chances are more like 1 in 3. So as the older you get, the higher the probability of developing Alzheimer's is. That said, about 5% of all those cases of Alzheimer's, those 5 million Americans with Alzheimer's, are under the age of 65.
Wow.
And so there are people who develop Alzheimer's disease in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. Part of my work at the association actually focused on those people who have younger onset Alzheimer's disease. I have a support group that I lead with that group of individuals, and a lot of those individuals have been really involved with a lot of research about Alzheimer's disease, who have really been important to our understanding of the disease. But it's basically the same disease when it affects somebody under the age of 65. It doesn't look any different in the brain. The symptoms aren't different, but what's different is that the person affected is in a different phase in their life than someone who's older.
So the imaging, the testing, everything else is, whether you're 30 or 70, the tests are the same?
Tests are the same. The only difference you might see with younger onset is the scientists have identified some genes that cause this younger onset Alzheimer's. Yeah. It doesn't account for all the cases of younger onset, probably less than 5% of those cases, but so they might do that kind of testing to see if that gene is there. But otherwise, it's very similar.
What treatments are available if somebody's diagnosed with Alzheimer's? We could talk about support, medications, or what. Just go through the whole gamut if you don't mind.
Sure. And as we talked about earlier, that's the main reason to me personally, why people should go through the steps of getting diagnosed, because there is treatment available. Unfortunately, we don't have the treatment that stops the disease in its tracks or cures the disease either, but we do have treatments that make the symptoms more manageable. There are medications that can help with memory, that can help with sleep, that can help with some of the behavior symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. There's coping strategies and support activities for the person with Alzheimer's disease that can help keep people as engaged as possible. Physical exercise is very important for the person with Alzheimer's to keep doing. So that's another treatment option in my mind that's available. And it's also really important to treat the family members that are supporting the person with Alzheimer's disease, because this is not a disease that just affects one person. Yep. And the caregivers for people with Alzheimer's are at really high risk for developing their own health issues. And studies have shown that caregivers that receive education and get support, their health outcomes are much better.
So can you just go through some of the models you guys utilize at the association, recommend to helping people, with the treatment, not medication, but what other aspects of modules are utilized to help assist individuals with, prolonging their disease state, if I may say so? If there's such a modules, I'm not sure if I'm asking the correct question, but is there such reading, or you mentioned exercising?
Sure.
Are there certain types of exercises that need to be done, or?
Yeah, there are things? Unfortunately or fortunately.
Sure.
I think the good news is people have some flexibility with how they approach this disease.
Okay.
In general, the kinds of lifestyle recommendations for the person with Alzheimer's include, first of all, getting regular exercise. And research has shown that people who, have some sort of aerobic activity 5 times a week and do some extremely light strength training can have slower disease progression than someone who doesn't. So that's important. It's also been shown that people that are isolated and that aren't aren't mentally active, not doing anything during the day, tend to progress more quickly too. There's nothing specific recommended. There's no specific program on the computer that someone would do, or years ago it was crossword puzzles to help the disease, but it's really a matter of making sure that your day is filled with meaningful activity. I think the other things that can help the person with the disease are making sure they get enough sleep, making sure that they reduce stress in their life, you know, making sure that they have, you know, support people to talk to. And a lot of these things are starting to gather research to show that these things are effective. And I will say anecdotally, from being in support groups and meeting with people who live with this disease and take these recommendations, they do better than people who are isolated.
And how long have you had support groups for? How long have you been doing this?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I've been leading support groups for people with Alzheimer's disease for about 10 years.
So your anecdotal data, you know, you've gathered this.
It goes back.
Exactly.
It goes back.
Exactly. Just a quick question on, you know, is there a relation between, you know, Alzheimer's and you know, our moms and dads and grandparents? If they had it, do I get it? And such, you know, is it hereditary, I guess, is the big question.
Sure. So the biggest risk factors for developing Alzheimer's disease are, first of all, age. The older we get, the higher risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. And then the second biggest risk factor is family history. We know that if someone has a family member who's had Alzheimer's, you have a greater risk than someone who doesn't have a family member. And if you have more than one, your risk is higher too. You know, the genetic factors with Alzheimer's disease are a huge part of studies that scientists are doing. Scientists have identified some risk genes that don't say that you're definitely going to get Alzheimer's, but can indicate whether someone has a better chance of getting Alzheimer's. And have identified, I think as I mentioned earlier, some genes that account for Alzheimer's in people under the age of 60. It's a small percentage of the overall population of people with Alzheimer's disease, but it's an important step in understanding the puzzle of Alzheimer's disease.
Now, just a quick question. Why can I know somebody that's 107 years old that's as sharp could be?
Yep.
And then I also know some individuals that are in their late 50s or 60s that have developed Alzheimer's disease. Any correlation? Anything that, you know, anything that dictates as to why that happens? You know, with a 107-year-old lady who's fine, and then somebody in their 60s that's not. Yeah. When it comes to Alzheimer's disease.
You know, there's a lot of research looking at, you know, what is causing Alzheimer's disease, and are there factors in the environment or our lifestyle choices or family history that impact whether we develop Alzheimer's. And scientists generally think it's a combination of factors. You know, it's not just one single reason that most people will develop Alzheimer's disease. And it is true. You can meet, while family history is a big risk factor, you also meet people who, you know, have developed Alzheimer's at 60 and have no family history whatsoever. And you can meet that 107-year-old person who's kind of outlived a lot of people in his or her family that maybe did have Alzheimer's, and they, you know, they got lucky. And there's probably something that they, you know, have done in their past, but it's not completely understood yet.
So which leads to my next question: is, you know, is there anything that an individual can do to lower our risks of getting Alzheimer's?
Well, there are some recommendations. Of course, you know, the two biggest risk factors of age and family history, we can't control that.
Of course.
But focusing on the things we can control, you know, one major one would be avoiding head trauma, because another risk factor that we didn't talk about, because it's not the top two, but it's a top risk, is head injury. So doing what you can to prevent head trauma, and if it happens, treating it appropriately as well. And then the other recommendations, you know, are to do the things that you would do to age in a healthy manner anyway. You know, eating a heart-healthy diet, getting exercise, staying engaged, all those kinds of recommendations that are good for other health conditions look to be good for Alzheimer's disease too.
Thank you for that. So, are there different forms of Alzheimer's?
There are. not necessarily different forms of Alzheimer's disease, but there are different forms of dementia.
Okay.
So as we talked about in the beginning, dementia is basically this big category of brain diseases. Alzheimer's being the most common, but there are, seems like every day a new type of dementia is being discovered. But some of the more common ones that we work with at the Alzheimer's Association are dementias that are caused by vascular problems for someone who's had a stroke or some other kind of problem with blood flow to their brain. We work with a lot of families who are dealing with Lewy body dementia, which is kind of a combination of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, in most simple terms. There's a whole category of frontotemporal lobe dementias as well. And these different types of dementias, I will say, they share more in common than they have that are different. But the changes in the brain are different, and the disease, the symptoms that are most troubling can be different, and the rates of progression can be different as well. And some of the treatment recommendations are different as well, which is why it's important to determine what type of dementia someone has.
Okay, so we have those categories. Are there different stages, of Alzheimer's, at different times of period as the one from diagnosis to whatever?
Sure. I mean, all the types of dementia, I think, would generally follow the same stages. And, generally when we try to describe how someone's doing, we look at people as in early, middle, and late stages. In the beginning stages of any of these types of dementia, symptoms tend to be mild. Most people can make some adaptations and still do most of the things they like to do. They might have to make some changes, but not necessarily drastic changes. In the middle stages of Alzheimer's disease, that is when people start to need help from others to perform their activities of daily living. But in the middle stages, most people are still mobile, are still can be engaged in conversation to some extent, not like they did before, but but are to some level. In the later severe stages is when people really are dependent for help in all areas of daily living. And for a lot of people are not very responsive to other people's interactions. It can vary. Some people stay. There's not some kind of formula that says you're in the early stages for a certain number of years, the middle stages for another term of years. It can vary a lot from person to person and can also depend on what type of dementia. But in general, Alzheimer's disease, the average lifespan for someone after diagnosis is 4 to 8 years. But we work with a lot of people who may have been dealing with disease for 20 years as well. So there's a huge range.
So it depends on the individual and the case.
It does.
So that leads to, you hit on this a little bit, Nicole, earlier. Any tips for caregivers caregivers of individuals with Alzheimer's disease, whether it's a son, a daughter, a mom, or dad, or I think that's important that we give that to our audience.
I have lots of tips, but I'll say my overall tip would be don't go it alone. I think a lot of people, because Alzheimer's doesn't have there's not a pill you can give somebody. There's not a simple answer to how to help somebody. I think a lot of families think they should be able to figure this out themselves. And Alzheimer's disease is a tough, frustrating disease that can change day to day. And we weren't born knowing how to help people with Alzheimer's disease. And I think it's really important that caregivers reach out to other people that they know have been in this situation, reach out to the Alzheimer's Association, talk to their doctor, and ask people, tell them what's going on and see what they should do. Because while this disease it's a frustrating and sad experience, but there are things that can make it so much more bearable. There are all kinds of simple changes we can recommend to families that can, for instance, avoid behaviors that might be upsetting, that can make the day so much more pleasant. But for most people, unless they're in this field, they're going to need to reach out, read, ask other people to find out what those are, because those aren't strategies that people readily know.
So what does the association provide to caregivers and individuals that suffer from Alzheimer's disease? Can you hit on some of those?
Sure.
So people could understand what the association does?
Yeah.
please.
So we offer a wide range of programs and services for families dealing with Alzheimer's disease, and almost all of our programs and services are free of charge to families. To find out about our programs and services, I recommend that people either call our 24/7 helpline at 800-272-3900, or if they prefer to email their questions, they can do that through our website as well.
Okay.
And we have experienced counselors who answer the emails, who take the phone calls 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Wow.
That can really start people, give them answers to their questions, give them support if it's just been a bad day and there's nothing they really want from us, but they just want someone to talk to. We can provide education, we can give referrals to resources, a whole range of things, and also point people to the other programs that would be available, which include education programs to learn about these coping strategies for caregivers as well as people with Alzheimer's, support groups to meet with other people going through the same situation, social activities for people in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's disease, as well as some safety services that are really important as well.
That's very important.
But I urge people just to call or email. You don't even need to know what your question is. If you just are willing to tell us what's going on, we can give you some ideas for how to make that better.
Well, thank you so much. I know how much work you guys do, so I'm very grateful for I'm sure as many people are grateful for the efforts that you guys do, and I thank you for being here today, Nicole.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to help raise awareness of this important cause.
My pleasure, my pleasure. According to the Alzheimer's Association, an estimated 5.3 million Americans of all ages have Alzheimer's disease in 2015, which is why we are so pleased that Nicole was able to join us today to educate us on this, on Alzheimer's. Thank you again, Nicole, for taking the time to speak with us, and thank you all for tuning in to A Healthier You. For health-related topics and more information, you can find us on Facebook. I'm Saad Dino, co-owner of Acton Pharmacy, West Concord Pharmacy, and Keys Drug and Newton, and I look forward to seeing you around town. Thank you so much.